Um, I want to mention a show called What Would You Do? It's can be found here on YouTube. I think it's I'm not sure what network it's on, but it can be found here on YouTube anyway. And basically, the format is they get actors to portray certain scenarios, controversial scenarios. To give a few examples, it could be, for example, two soldiers who happen to be gay embracing each other in a bar. It could be a young woman getting unwanted flirtation. It could be a small person being discriminated against because they're small. All these sort of scenarios, basically. Muslim customer refuse service because they're Muslim, etc., etc. Um, and I think that it's quite a popular show because it gets a lot of views online. Anyway, I've seen a lot of these episodes, and it makes interesting viewing. I think I spoke about this once before in one of my videos, and someone said they didn't like the idea of it. I have sort of mixed opinions on this show. I'll start with the positive, then maybe talk about some areas where I think there might be problems with it. If you know the show, then I don't really go into details about what's about you. If you don't know the show, check one of them out. They're only about 7 minutes each. Anyway, and they have hidden cameras, then usually what happens is when a member of the public intervenes in the situation, if they intervene, that is, then the sort of TV crew come out and interview them and ask why they've done so. Anyway, um, I think there's a positive side to this because it shows a positive aspect of human nature. It shows people sticking up for each other. It shows a sort of benevolent streak that people have. They see something wrong and they want to intervene. They want to challenge the person who is doing the discriminating or the harassing of another person. So it shows that people are not selfish. That they have a lot of people have an inherent decency, I guess you could say. Bear in mind the members of the public are not aware that it's being filmed, so this isn't like they're not trying to get attention or something. They're trying to be have a go heroes, for want of a better term. Um, so from that point of view, I think it shows that there are a lot of decent people out there, and sometimes I find Americans get slandered quite a lot, like Americans are this, Americans are that. But this shows actually there's a lot of decent people in the United States, and be interesting to see if they've done this in other countries, but I'm sure you'd see very similar results. There may be cultural differences in some countries depending on, I would imagine possibly in single party. It would be interesting to see in different contexts because in a country like China, for example, it's much rarer for people to intervene in situations, and it's not. I don't think it's anything to do with character. It's just the situation of a country. Sometimes, America's a country where freedom of speech and so on are considered to be big things, and it'd be very similar, I'd imagine, in the UK. There's other situations where people don't like what they're saying, but they choose not to get involved. And you know what? I don't judge those people because I think sometimes you can't blame people for being pragmatic and thinking it might make things worse or thinking about their own safety. I don't think that's cowardice. I don't think it's especially if the person involved, say the bully or the harasser, is a physically intimidating person to them, then I don't blame them for not getting involved. But I think it's a good thought-provoking show in the sense that it makes you wonder what would you do in the situation. So that's the positive side. A side that I would be more wary about, and I think maybe the producers need to think a little bit about this. Um, clearly the show has good intentions. It's trying to get people to be open-minded and think about certain scenarios. But sometimes you see situations escalating and people getting heated up, and they always do intervene. But there's a slight risk because what they do is they get actors basically to play the jerks, so to speak, the harassers or whatever it is. I can imagine a situation where they might be gambling a little bit that people are not going to respond in an aggressive way. There may be a situation, for example. I remember there was one episode it showed a woman who looked like she was suffering domestic violence, and there was one guy in the bar looked like he was going to really dick the actor who was playing the abusive husband. So situations like that where they're taking a little bit of a risk. In other words, they let the acting go a little bit too far, and I think that's I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it look authentic, but I think that can be a bit of a gamble because they might end up with one of their actors getting assaulted. Kudos to the actors, by the way. I think it takes a certain degree of courage to play the bad guy or the bad girl and know that you're doing it and know that you're going to possibly be abused by uh, morally outraged members of the public. Um, but anyway, that's the show. If you've seen it, let me know your thoughts on it. Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea? If you think it's a good idea, I imagine you think so for similar reasons to me. If you think it's a bad idea, please do explain why. I completely respect your opinion. I'm just curious to know. Um, but it does make, I think it is thought provoking. It does make you wonder what you would do in a real life situation, and it makes me think of my own life. And looking back, have I ever been involved? I've never been involved in a very dramatic situation, but I have intervened a few times. I remember once, for example, I saw a really gobby, loudmouth kid, and I knew he was a bully, and he was mouthing off to another kid, and I think I intervened on that occasion, and I didn't physically hit him or anything, but I did give him something to think about, and it shut him up for a while. I heard someone say a homophobic slur to a gay friend of mine, and I did have words with the guy. You know, I believe violence should be a last resort, so I don't have I wouldn't advocate people, regardless of the circumstance, sort of using violence unless it's absolutely in the case of defending someone. But if we're talking about, for example, verbal bullying or something, I think it's better to confront them rather than, just go up and clock them, as tempting as it would be. I don't think that, what I would say is every situation needs to be seen in its individual context. Now, what this show does is show situations that are blatantly wrong in dealing with things that are blatant discriminatory, racism, etc., etc. And no sane person could argue otherwise. You can argue. For example, one episode was a guy with Down syndrome working in a convenience store, and a woman was really mouthing off to him and saying he was backward. And now no one could argue that's in any way justified. Um, But the question is to what extent is intervention justified, and could it make things worse? I mean, in this situation, the actors always sort of get a little bit defensive and back off, or make excuses. But I think it's a little bit utopian as well because it kind of makes it look like it would all be a nice happy ending. And I think the real world's not quite like that because in the real world, you get some thugs and bullies who more often than not, they would back down if someone stands up to them, but in other circumstances, they might get aggressive and things could get worse. Whereas the actors don't really show that side of things. Um, Personally, I would like to think I'm the sort of man who does do the right thing. But the reality is sometimes you do need to judge a situation on its own merit. You cannot always play the hero. Um, and I don't think that's from lacking moral compass. I think sometimes it can actually inflame the situation. Um, there's certain circumstances I would like to think that I would intervene, but I've also heard of circumstances where people have tried to do the right thing and they've ended up regretting it for one reason or another. I've heard, for example, about decent men, for example, seeing a woman being abused, and then when he goes to the woman's help, the woman actually turns around and defends the man who's abusing her. It's this weird Stockholm syndrome, I guess you would call it. And then it ends up just like the guy who's trying to be a decent man ends up basically not really getting thanked for it. Um, sometimes doing the right thing isn't the easy thing. I would like to think I had the moral compass to not really care, but sometimes another scenario would be this one, and I was speaking to a friend about this recently. If, as an adult man, I saw a child who was lost or a child who was injured, that would be a good what would you do situation. I think they should do that one. Um, one side would be, well, your adult instinct would take over. Okay, look after the kid, bring them to a security guard, or ask them where the parents are, or something like that. But especially in the UK, I'm not sure if this is the same in the US or other countries, but in the UK, we've had a lot of situations whereby there's been outrages, for example, about paedophiles. So if you see an adult, especially a man, alone with a child, people automatically assume he must be a paedophile. It wouldn't necessarily be. People wouldn't necessarily think that that might be an adult man who's thinks the kid is lost and who's trying to do the right thing, bring the security guard. And I have to be honest, if I saw a kid crying, I would be very cautious. Probably what I would do is not go to the kid directly, but maybe just phone the police or something and just say, I'm concerned about this. But I do think that there's situations like that that are there could be consequences if you get involved, and sometimes doing the heroic thing is not always the most sensible thing. And I'm saying this as someone who doesn't believe in sort of keeping myself to myself. I do believe there's circumstances where it's necessary to get involved. If I see a single guy being beaten up by a gang, I would consider that man my brother. That would be my human instinct, and I would want to think that I would at least try to do something. If I saw a homeless guy being picked on by a gang of teenagers, if I saw a disabled person, um, mocked, and that was another situation actually. I did see some cocky kid in a store once mock a disabled person, and I got pretty angry on that situation. And I let I guess I just told the kid to piss off and mind his own business and leave the guy alone, something like that. I do think there's sort of a social responsibility factor. If you are an able-bodied person, if you are someone who's quite physically fit, you don't have to be an MMA fighter or something, but if you're at least physically healthy and you see a vulnerable person being picked on, I think to some extent you have a responsibility to intervene. To some extent, if the person doing it is not is on par with yourself. If it's someone who's much more aggressive or you don't think that you can handle that person yourself, I wouldn't blame people for not getting involved. I really, really wouldn't. Um, but I think I do believe in social responsibility and I believe everyone has. On the other hand, it can work the other way where people can actually get nosy in things they don't actually know the full situation. I know I've had personal experience about that. Once when I was in the States, actually, I was 13, and I remember was having an argument with my brother and sister, pretty heated argument, and a woman actually pulled up in a car and told us off. Now at the time, I felt very angry because I thought she was being nosy. Even today, as an adult, still think she was in the wrong. So I remember that situation, and it was not something that really concerned her. It wasn't like a case of bullying or something. It was just siblings having an argument. That's something that parents should handle. It's not. Um, there's other situations. Sometimes, for example, you get guys who sometimes I think try to play a chivalrous role when they don't know the whole story. An example might be if a man and a woman is in an argument. Now, obviously, if a man is using violence against a woman, that would be most guys would sort of either intervene or think it's wrong, and most women would as well. But there might be circumstances, for example, it's just a couple arguing, that is their business. I wouldn't get involved in that situation unless the man was using violence. But or if the woman was using violence, and that's another actual question. Why is there double standards in that regard? Why would it be considered okay for a woman to do it? I wouldn't necessarily get involved and defend another man, but I certainly wouldn't laugh about it, and I wouldn't like think the guy's weak or something. And I think what a bitch. So I think every circumstance, people need to think about it rationally. I think if you are walking past a certain situation, I think everyone should think carefully before getting involved and really consider, do they understand really what is going on? If it's clear cut as in the what would you do videos, then I think there is a case for getting involved. But there's other circumstances whereby people don't actually know the full story and they do get involved. I don't know whether it's because they're trying to be heroes or I do find that some guys play the chivalrous role to a point where they then get all aggro and aggressive and they actually don't know the whole story. Um, and I've not much time for those guys. They're not brave and they're not noble. They're just being boneheaded. Violence, by the way, should be a last resort, regardless of the circumstance. If someone is using violence, attacking a more vulnerable person, then yes, violence could be justified to protect that person. But if it's just verbals involved, then I don't think violence is warranted. I saw a lot of people commenting on those videos, like if it was me, I would smash this person's head in and stuff. And I think, well, really, would you? I mean, I understand the anger factor. I understand, thinking that the person doing it is a scumbag, but would you really use violence? Because then, you would just end up being arrested for assault, even if the person might well deserve it. So basically, what I'm getting at here is to what extent does social responsibility warrant intervention in something that isn't directly involving you? Um, we've done this in the UK actually. I think there was a social experiment. It showed a Muslim woman being harassed, and she was wearing a hijab, and she was harassed by racists, and they were actors, and there were a few people intervened. Wasn't the same show; it was foreign news, I think. But some people say that there's sort of politically correct left-wing bias on this show. I disagree with that because they show all sorts of situations. I mean, for example, they showed a white barber getting harassed, and they showed a black guy with a white girlfriend, and the white girlfriend got harassed in a barber's in Harlem. So they do get a wide range of setups, and I do overall I think it's a good show. I think it's a good concept, but they do need to be a little bit careful that they don't let the acting go too far, and someone might be too hot-headed and intervene. Um, anyway, that's my perspective. Personally, I don't get involved in every scenario. There are circumstances where I wouldn't get. I mean, if I see a couple arguing, none of my business. I'm not going to get involved. If I see a couple arguing and maybe the man is getting aggressive, then I might get involved. I might, but again, I would think carefully about it. If I thought they were both drunk or something, or I don't know. I think every situation you have to deal with, look at it carefully. That is true honor. That is true common sense. To think about each situation individually, to be sensible, level-headed. And I think that's a large part of being a decent human being. And it doesn't mean you always have to play the hero, but nor does it mean you always turn a blind eye when you can do something. Anyway, I've been talking for long enough. Let me know your thoughts on this. What would you do personally? And please be honest. I'm not going to judge anyone on my comments thread if you're honest. If you get involved, if you don't get involved, I'm not going to judge you. I'm just interested in hearing different perspectives. Thanks for watching.